Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. This is going to be my fourth and final question and answer video in response to the lovely questions that you left for me on my gratitude video for having reached the milestone of 1,000 subscribers. So in the last video, I had asked Maria Andrea from Books and Bocadillos, I had asked her question. I had asked her first question, but I forgot to ask her second question or to respond to her second question. So I'm going to start with that. She asks, what is a favorite or memorable celebration or celebratory scene or moment in a book? And I'm going to go with Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, the end of the novel, when Scrooge wakes up and realizes that he's a changed man and he hasn't missed Christmas, and he buys Christmas dinner and has it sent to to Bob Cratchit, who works for him, and brings Christmas dinner to his family. And it's just a wonderful, beautiful celebration that just kind of encapsulates the meaning of Christmas for me. So thank you, Maria Andrea, for these beautiful questions. Next, I have a question from a subscriber, Constance Campbell, who asks, would you ever consider offering an online continuing education class on literature? Which books or topics would tempt you most? It's certainly something I think about. I certainly think about doing more of some kind of a read along, or focusing on an author or a type of literature. So yes, I am toying with the idea, but I don't have any firm plans in mind just yet. I know we talked on one of my videos about the possibility of doing a John Irving read along. I would like to do that with a bunch of authors. Barbara Kingsolver for one, Louise Erdrich would be another. Maybe poetry would be another if there was interest in something like that. Okay. Next, Amelia Reads 589 says, my question is if you have always wanted to be a teacher. Yes. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a teacher. I played school all the time. I think probably from the time I was about 8, I wanted to be a teacher. And then when I got to high school and, got serious about reading and had 2 wonderful high school English teachers, I had a really good idea that that's what I was going to do. So yes, I would say yes. Okay. Next, Brindis, daughter of Gunnar, asks, have you read any Nordic or Icelandic literature, or would you be interested in doing that? I'm embarrassed to say that I have not read any, but I would absolutely be interested in doing that. I certainly saw a bunch of people reading the sagas at some point, not too long ago. But yes, it absolutely is something I'd be open to. Okay. Next, I have Evening Reader. My question for you: what's the thing that surprised you the most about having a BookTube channel? Here's to your next 1,000. I think what has surprised me the most is the depth of relationships that I have formed with people already. Everybody refers to the BookTube community. It's a very, very real thing. And in a very short time that I've been here, I'm only in my 5th month on BookTube, I have developed really genuine friendships with people that extend beyond BookTube. And I think that's what, while I knew this was going to be a good place for me once I got over the initial rough spots, I had no idea that it was going to be so rich in the relationships, and that's been the most wonderful surprise about the whole thing. Okay, next. I don't want to miss anybody. I'm going to just cross some of these off. Next, I have Cliff's Dark Gems. And Cliff asks, what is your most precious memory in all your years as a teacher? You know, I taught for almost 40 years, so I don't know that I can have one most precious memory, but a bunch of things come to mind as being very precious memories, and one of them happened not too long ago. It was close to the end of my career, and I was teaching a senior English class, but it was a special education class with a small group of students who had very severe disabilities. Some of them were learning disabilities. Some of them were just really emotional blocks that were preventing them from learning. And so I had several aides in the room with me. Some kids had their own aide, and we had almost an individual learning plan, going on in the room for each student. But I had this one young man who was really very, very bright, and his disabilities were not of an academic nature. He really had emotional disturbances from a whole lot of trauma that had occurred in his life. And he was really bright, and he discovered that year that he loved to read, and I couldn't give him enough. He just wanted to keep going, and often he would just kind of sit in the back of the room and just read ahead or forge ahead on whatever it was that we were doing. And I just kept giving him things to read. And I will never forget this day. I was working with another kid, working one-on-one, and this young man that I'm talking about was sitting in the back, and he was reading his copy of Hamlet. And suddenly he closed the book, and he just kind of like slammed it down on his desk, and he just sort of like blurted out from the back of the room, "Wow." And I turned around and I just said, "What's up?" And he said, "I think this might be the best book I've ever read." And I just, I wanted to hug him, and I wanted to cry. And I went down to my department office after that class, and I walked in and I said, "I think my work here is done." I felt like I had arrived. Something really incredible happened in that class. And a kid who never would have pictured himself reading Shakespeare decided that Hamlet was the best thing he had ever read, and it just has stayed with me. Okay. Thank you, Cliff, for that question. Cliff is a teacher too. Okay, I also have a question from Evening Reader. Nope. I said that already. Did I do that? I did that. I did Evening Reader. That was what surprised me the most, right? We talked about that. Sorry. Then I have a couple of questions that sort of go together. A couple of people were asking me very, very similar questions. So I'm going to try to address those together. Aaron Read a Book, or Aaron Read a Book, and Farah at Bookstalgic, and Read Becca all asked me questions about my travel experiences and my favorite places. So I'm going to kind of talk about those together. Farah asked about my favorite place that I've ever traveled to, and Aaron Read a Book asked what country was my favorite, and what is my favorite place in the U.S. So as I have talked about probably ad nauseum now, I am planning the trip of a lifetime to Ireland. I don't know that it's going to be my favorite place in the world, but I've been thinking about this and planning for this for such a long time that it feels like my favorite, and I haven't gotten there yet. In this country, and I think that Read Becca said, yes, she said, what is your favorite place to live or to visit, and why? My favorite place in this country is Vermont. And it's a place that I've been returning to throughout my life since I was 17 years old. I went to college in Vermont. I went to graduate school in Vermont. It's certainly a place where my friends convene whenever we can, but it's also where my family and those nearest and dearest to me, where they live as well. And it's a place I hope to live again sometime. So Vermont. Thank you for those questions. Then I had several questions from two people, all related to poetry, because I've been, doing a lot of poetry videos. So I'm going to take these questions together. So Poetry Crone 6061 asks, what poet or poem do you think was most popular with your students, and what do you think was the appeal of that poet or poem? I guess that begs as well the question of what poem they found least appealing. I understand if there is no real answer to these questions, that what people end up liking varies so widely that the best thing to do is expose them widely, absolutely, and see what sticks. Wishing you the best in this ongoing adventure. And then Patricia H. asked, I'd love to hear something about how you approached introducing students to poetry, how you got them thinking about imagery and interpretation, what sort of writing exercises you assigned. So I think to answer all of these poetry questions, I'm going to talk about a poem that I think was one of the favorites among my students, and that's Billy Collins' poem, The Lanyard. I've read this poem in a couple of my videos, but what the poem is about the poet reflecting on when he was a child, or the speaker is reflecting on when he was a child and was at a summer camp, and out of boredom was making a lanyard. Didn't even really know what it was making a lanyard as a gift for his mother. And so through the poem you hear the voice of the mother saying, I gave you life, I gave you eyes to see with, and a mouth to eat with, and legs to walk on, and the son is like, and I'm giving you a lanyard, and here is your lanyard. And it goes back and forth between, the things that a mother gives to a child, and then, this little kid's, kind of feeble gift that he says he made out of boredom, but he thinks he's giving his mother the world. So my students always loved this poem, and I certainly love this poem. And I think the way that I was able to introduce it and make it accessible to them was that before we even read the poem, I had them do a personal narrative. I had them write about a memory of a gift that they either made or bought, but to give to a parent or an adult in their life when they were little, when they were young. And then they came into class having written these, and we shared them. And they loved that, just talking about these, the little things that, the silly things kids do, and the funny things they make, and how their parents still have them, or they're hanging on the walls, or they're on shelves, or whatever. And so we did that, and I shared mine as well. And then we read the poem, And then we watched Billy Collins read the poem. There are wonderful videos of him at the Dodge Poetry Festival. One year, my students even got to hear him read the poem at the Dodge Poetry Festival. So they get the humor when they hear him read it, and they get his sort of deadpan way of delivery. And then we go back and analyze the poem. How does the poet, get these ideas across? And I taught a lot of poetry in AP English literature because poetry is like a third of the exam, and they have, one of the 3 essays that students have to write is analyzing a poem. So we did a lot of practice for that. But with this poem and any poem that I taught, I would try to emphasize maybe 3 literary devices that were prominent in that poem and at work in that poem, because they have to be able to identify them and write about them and talk about how they help to convey meaning. So that's what we would do. So we would look at the poem and look at the 3 prominent literary devices being used, and then talk about that. So that was, a way, by making it personal and making it something that could be identified with, I think that helped in the understanding process. Poems and poets that were difficult to teach, I mean, the older the diction, the harder it was to teach. It's a rare kid who comes in being able to read Shakespeare's sonnets. That they take more work. Poetry from, I'm going to say, the 18th, the 17th, the 16th, the 15th century, where, that's a lot more distant to them, and that's harder. So, I can't say what poets my kids didn't like. I know what they did like. I know they tended to like what they could understand and what they could relate to. They also liked Mary Oliver, I guess because I like Mary Oliver so much. And one year she was the poem on the essay. The essay question was one of her poems, and they had to write about that. And they were convinced that I had something to do with that, which I did not. I had absolutely nothing to do with the AP exam. But they were just like, this is a Miss Mahoney question, So it was very sweet. So that, I hope that answers, or at least approaches an answer to this very, very thoughtful, these thoughtful questions about the teaching of poetry. I also have a really wonderful question from Tammy, who is, her channel name is The Purple Pumpkin. And she is a high school librarian in Virginia. And she asks, kind of a hypothetical question. One of the many challenges high school librarians face is getting faculty to collaborate with them. It seems like it should be common sense that high school faculty would support the school librarian, but I can tell you from experience, some faculty are easy supporters of the school library, while others are much more difficult to get them and their students into the library for a variety of reasons. I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes in high school libraries during your decades of teaching. If I had been your school librarian, what kind of support would you like to have had from me that would have made your job as an English teacher easier? Or in other words, how could I have convinced you to collaborate with me? Okay, so in our department, we had required research projects and research papers. So it was very, very common for us to work very closely with the school librarian. We would schedule time for our classes to come into the library. We would make appointments with the librarian to do opening sessions with our classes to talk about the various resources that were available for them on a particular topic, whatever it was that we were doing the research on. And then our librarian would get to know our kids' projects so well that she would work one-on-one with kids. She'd be finding them sources and helping them to find sources. And it was we really did, as a department, we collaborated well with the librarian. And then We also, all of my teachers in my department, along with me, we worked with the middle school and the high school librarian to put together a wonderful document, summer reading suggestions, and we revised it every single year, and we made it kid friendly and reader friendly, and it was something that we were all proud of because we all worked on it, and we had input from kids and input from the librarians and input from every English teacher in the department. It was a masterpiece. I understand that a new administration that came in after I retired did away with summer reading completely. It's gone. Our list doesn't exist anymore. The two librarians that I worked with also aren't there anymore. Very, very sad, because we were a department that worked, like clockwork with the librarian. And Tammy, I imagine that you and I would have worked together really well as well. Okay. Getting to the end here. Okay, so D, my friend D at Through the Pages with D, and please check out her channel if you haven't already done so. D asks, what is something about you that we would fall out of our chairs to know? Well, okay, this is something I've never talked about on my BookTube channel. In my 30s, throughout my 30s, because it took me 10 years, I studied. I studied for 10 years. This is postgraduate school. I studied for 10 years at a modern psychoanalytic institute. This was postgraduate work. And this was a modern psychoanalytic institute. I worked in a state mental hospital with severely regressed patients, and I worked in a low-fee community health center as well. That's something that I could make lots of videos about, but it's something I have not talked about on the channel thus far. And then a former student of mine, Cole, whose name on BookTube is Cole Esquire. Cole asks, Cole knew about my studies. I was already involved in them when Cole was my student. How has your study of psychology informed or influenced your reading, and how did it inform or influence your teaching? It's funny, I was told when I was a new candidate at the school that my background in literature was actually excellent preparation for the analytical skills that would be required in this program. The kind of analysis that I bring to literature had, there were certain places where it transferred well to the study of psychoanalytic literature. Certainly my reading is incredibly diverse. I have a huge psychology library and psychoanalytic library as well. And how it influenced my teaching, I know that the kind of classroom climate that I created was the direct result of my training at this institute. Students felt, I think, that they could speak freely and openly. I know that students felt seen and heard in my class. And it was a place where, I created a place of acceptance. And I think that my analytic training profoundly influenced my teaching of writing. This is something I have written about, and I've presented about this at conferences as well. But helping students to find their voices in writing, and also the healing effects that can have, that was a direct result of my analytic training. So thank you for those questions. And then finally, I am at my last question. My first booktuber that I ever met, that I ever knew, as I've talked about now in many, many videos, was Angelia at Read and Reread. So I'm going to wrap this up with Angelia's questions. So Angelia says, do you have an all-time favorite novel that you taught? I've answered that one. Every grade, I had an all-time favorite for every grade, and that's in, I think that's in the first 3 videos. Number 2, I always ask this. You have a 5-minute mad dash free shopping spree at your favorite bookstore. What section will you run to first? What's your strategy? I would first run to new fiction. I would pick up a lot of new fiction. Because this is free, right? 5-minute mad dash free shopping spree. So I'd get a bunch of hardback new fiction. Then I would go to mysteries, and I would buy some new mysteries, hardcover, but I would go to paperbacks, and I would stock up on paperback mysteries. Then I would go to poetry. Poetry books are really expensive. I would take a lot of poetry books and add them to my basket too, because they're free. And hopefully I would get that done in 5 minutes. And if it's, well, the Barnes & Noble that I used to know really well, I could do that in 5 minutes easily, because I knew that place by heart. And then finally, Angelia asks, if you could contribute a poem to Allie's baseball mitt, what would you choose? So this is a reference to Allie from The Catcher in the Rye. In the novel, Holden is really having a breakdown. He's horribly depressed, and he's just been thrown out of another high school, and he's on his way home for Christmas vacation, and he just leaves school early, and he's walking around the streets of New York City trying to get up the courage to go home. But the reason he's so depressed and the reason that he's so troubled is that his favorite person in the world, his best friend, was his younger brother, Allie. And Allie has, before the novel begins, Allie has died of leukemia. And Holden just can't cope with the world, with a world where something like that could happen. And he tells us a lot of wonderful memories that he has of Allie, and one of them is that Allie was such a neat kid. He was such a great kid that he used to write poetry on his baseball mitt, so that when he was standing in the outfield, if he was getting bored out there, he'd read poetry on his baseball mitt. That's the kind of kid Allie was. Like, how can you not love a kid like that? So Angelia is asking me what poem I would add to Allie's baseball mitt. So I'm torn between 2 Mary Oliver poems, The Summer Day and Messenger. Messenger is they're both 2 of my favorite poems, but Messenger is a poem about how through keeping our sense of wonder and astonishment, and through always having a sense of gratitude, and putting that gratitude out into the world, that's really how we can live forever. So I think that's what I would put on Allie's baseball mitt. And speaking of gratitude, I am so very grateful to all of you for being on this channel, for following me, for asking me these lovely questions, and just for the supportive and lovely things that you write in my comments. I am so grateful for you. I think this concludes the the mini-series, the question and answers. So, as always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.